Hi, welcome to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about the books I read in October. I'm really excited to share them with you and just to share some of the insights that I had. So if you're new to my channel, I created this channel as a homeschooling resource to do different curriculum ideas, organizational ideas, and ways to invite Christ into your homeschool space. So if you're interested in those things, please hit that subscribe button and let's talk about books. So the first thing I wanted to share was my Kindle. This last month, I read like half the month I spent on my Kindle. That's not always a good thing. It's usually like fluffy romance books and stuff, but I found this new author on Kindle Unlimited. And so I just read a lot of her books. Her name is Jody Headland, I believe. I'll link all this information below and all the book reviews that I do have. I'll put them down below so you can look those and check those out if you want to. Anyways, and so I at first didn't want to share. I'm like, oh, it's just fluffy, like romance type stuff. But I actually learned quite a bit from a lot of her stories. Most of them are set like in the 1800s. Right now I'm reading some that are back in like the 1300s, talking more medieval knights and princesses or stuff like that, sort of a thing. But the ones that were in the 1800s, I learned a lot of history from them. Several of them, she has things at the end that talks about what inspired her story. And it's based on something in history that actually happened. So I thought that was really cool. But as I read these books, I just became very grateful for the time that I live in. Is I read about people having to cross, basically an Oregon Trail type situation. But before anybody, any women at least, had ever gone to Oregon on ground, traveled. They had traveled around on boat and come into like San Francisco or that kind of thing, but they hadn't actually traveled across the United States. And just how hard it was and how horrible it was. And I've learned a lot about pioneers and all those kind of things, but reading these stories also just, I'm glad that I don't have to live that way. But then there was a lot talking about like the London slums and just the horrible living circumstances there and just the struggle there. And there was a series that she wrote. She has a lot of like little series that she writes that all have kind of different themes, I guess. But there was one that she wrote that talked about lighthouses, which I love lighthouses. And so I was excited about that, but just how hard it is. And then just people having to make sure that they have enough food for the whole winter, because once it snows, they can't go anywhere. They're just stuck there. And just the struggle to survive. Nowadays, especially where I live, we don't really have to struggle to survive very much. I've been very blessed and I have a lot and I'm just very grateful for it. So reading these stories, even though they were more just like leisure reading, just made me very grateful for what I have, especially right now when the world is in chaos. So that was the first thing I wanted to mention. So I'll list her information below and maybe some of my favorites because I read a lot. Okay, the second one I wanted to mention is Virgil Wander. And this was our book club book. I've mentioned this before. We made a list at the beginning of the year and we haven't been meeting in person. We haven't been meeting, virtually either. But I've been still trying to go down the list because it's books I wouldn't normally pick to read for myself and it gives me a variety of things. So this was the one on the list for October. I don't feel like I liked it very much. I'm unsure how I would rate this book. And one of the big issues is it's more of a character-driven book than a plot-driven book. And there's not a storyline, like not a specific storyline. There sort of is, but even the reviews online and the description on the back of the book kind of gives you this idea that it's more about understanding the character development and arc. So this is similar to books I would have read in high school in like my English classes, and I had a really hard time with those types of books. And if there's not like a specific storyline with an ultimate purpose at the end, I have a really hard time following what's going on or appreciating it. I guess I'm just not very good at appreciating really, really good writing. As long as the story is good, even if the writing is not super great, I still love it. So I feel like there's probably a lot of people out there that would appreciate this book way more than I did. But I was just gonna read the little excerpt on the back just so you kind of have an idea about what it's about. But it's based in the upper Midwest, which it says in the back. So it says it's a sweeping story of new beginnings against all odds that follows the inhabitants of a hard luck town in their quest to revive its flagging heart. So carried aloft by quotidian, I looked this word up, I had never heard it before. So it means like everyday kind of pleasures, which makes sense in the context of this. So sorry that I do not know how to say that word very well. But so we'll say it with the simplified definition: carried aloft by everyday pleasures of kite flying, movies, fishing, baseball, necking in parked cars. It's a clean book. It's pretty darn clean. And falling in love. Virgil Wander is a swift, full journey into the heart and heartache of an often overlooked upper Midwest by a master storyteller. I haven't read anything else by him. Left? I don't know, sorry. Anyways, I haven't read any other stories by him, but the reviews on Amazon are really, really high. People really love this book. So I just feel like it wasn't a good book for me, but I feel like a lot of people out there would love it. So if you like this and really, really appreciate good writing and good character development, this is a book for you. Okay, so the third book that I read, I have actually read another book that's very similar to it. So I was gonna mention both of them. So the one that I read this last month was 10 Things Your Student with Autism Wishes You Knew. And then I read this one several months ago. I can't even remember exactly when. It was before I believe I was doing these videos. And so I don't have a video for it, but I do have a book review for it on my blog. So I'll put that down below. But this is 10 Things Every Child with Autism Wishes You Knew. So as I was thinking of the differences, when I first got these, I was worried they're gonna be kind of the exact same book, but I feel like they're not. I feel like they're worth the read. They're different enough that I would recommend having both of them. So this one that I read several months ago, I feel is really good if you just have a child that's been diagnosed with autism and you're interacting with a child that has autism. It goes through some of the struggles that you might see in an autistic child, and I just think it's very helpful. So let me just tell you a few of the 10 things in here. So basically it's like each has a chapter. So like my senses are out of sync, and then I'm very visually oriented. So those are a few of the things that this book is going to talk about, and just kind of go through some of the things that maybe you should know if you're a parent or a family member or anything like that, or even a teacher, even though this one's geared more towards teachers or parent teachers. It says that, so I like that because that it can apply to all of us. This one I felt elicited more emotional response from me. It wasn't just, this is a list or kind of, I guess a list or troubleshooting guide. That's kind of what I felt like this one was. So this one just elicited that response that autistic children are real children, and the importance of really knowing somebody. I feel like that's what this book taught me, is just no matter who it is, whether they have a disability or not, it's just the importance of really like deeply knowing someone. So I really loved that in this book. So one of the things that runs throughout this book comes from a quote that's at the very beginning. And I know this is a very common quote, so you probably have heard it, but I love this. So it's a Chinese kind of proverb. It says, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, but teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. So that's basically what this book kind of goes through, is how you can teach your child so that they can feed themselves for a lifetime, and not just kind of managing them, I guess, but giving them resources and the ability to be able to function and, throughout their whole life, instead of just having moments of chaos and freaking out and all that kind of stuff, and you stepping in and helping them all the time. They can learn how to manage their own emotions, at least to an extent, depending on the child. So I love that quote from here, and it is a theme throughout the whole book. As she goes through things, she always comes back to that idea. And so I just really love that. So another thing that really stuck out to me in this book is that she said autism is knowable. And I just love that. Sometimes you look at things and you're just like, there is no way I'm ever gonna get this. I'm never gonna understand this child. But autism is knowable. If you put in the effort, you can truly understand and know the child. You can understand what's hard for them, what triggers them, how to make it better, and you can really focus on those good, positive things about them instead of always just focusing on the frustrating, negative things that are happening. And then something else that I really loved, one of the chapters in here basically talks about making sure we're very clear when we're speaking to a child, especially an autistic child, making our intentions very clear to them. Most kids in general are not going to understand all the underlying messages that we convey in what we say. And so just say what you mean and mean what you say, basically. And so it goes through and talks about some testing that one of these kids was going through with a math. I don't know if it was even a test. It might have just been some math homework. And it has the problems listed here and how they give a lot of extra information that's totally meaningless in them being able to solve the problem. But to a child with a disability, especially an autistic child, it's very hard for them to pick through and decide what information is the most important and what information is not the most important. And so it confuses them. And so in here, she shows how you could rewrite the problem to make it just clear. It's still asking the same thing, but it's very clear and it's a lot easier for them to understand. And something as a teacher myself and as thinking back to when I was in high school, I had a teacher that his questions were not wrote, that was really good English, were written with the intent to trick you. And it was so hard. Like he'd said this and other students had said this, like his goal was to fail you, basically. Like he wanted to see that he could trick you, that he was superior. And that was horrible. I ended up switching out of his math class into another one that was way better and with a teacher that had good intentions. And it breaks my heart now, and it was hard then. Obviously, I was super frustrated that someone would do that. And so I feel like when we write questions, even if we're not intending to trick somebody, just make sure that we understand what we're asking someone to do, and even have a student read through it and see if they get it. You know, someone that's maybe middle ground, not your smartest student, not the one that's struggling the most, but see if they understand it. If they don't understand it, then ask them why and rewrite the question. It doesn't show weakness in you or anything like that. It just shows you're willing to understand where they need some help. And I think that was kind of the key of this whole book, is that us helping these students and adapting how we're teaching them isn't giving into a weakness. You know, it isn't showing weakness, it's showing a strength, actually, to show that we're willing to take time to really understand them and to help them where they need help. So I think these books are really good. If you have an autistic child, if you interact with autistic children, they're both really, really good and have just slightly different perspectives that I thought were very helpful. Okay, so the last book that I read was The Happiest Kids in the World. So this is talking about the Netherlands, and this book was great. It was actually a fairly quick read. It's written by two moms that are actually transplants to the Netherlands, and one of them is from San Francisco. That's kind of where she grew up. She is Asian in heritage, but her family had moved to San Francisco. And then another one's from London, I think, or, from England. And so just kind of their experience coming to the Netherlands as outsiders, I don't know if that's the best term to use, and how they adapted and just learned the different things that are taught in the Netherlands and how they just kind of have this relaxed lifestyle that's very family focused and things like that. So I enjoyed this book. Most of it I agreed with. There was a few things that I was like, mostly in like the sex and drugs sections. And I'll talk about those in a minute, but at least some of the things we're not going to talk about all the things. But I just wanted to share a quote from here. Sorry, I just have my fingers in the books, but so I have this little bookmark right here. So one of the things that I thought was really cool, they ride bikes a lot in the Netherlands, if you didn't know that, and tons of bikes, and they've created kind of their country in a way that it's fairly easy to get around by bicycle. There's a lot of places that's not the case, but there they've created that kind of environment. And so kids from a very young age, are put on these bicycles. They become very aware of their environment and their surroundings. And as they get older, they're expected to ride their bikes to school, to go play, all those kind of things. And it's a little bit like free range parenting, like let them go out and try things, even if they're still young. And it's hard because you're like, want to keep them here or something. Let them go out and experience things, and how riding their bikes teaches them so many great things. And I love this so much because it talks about even in yucky weather, they learn how to hold their umbrellas so that they don't blow away, but also they still ride in yucky weather. No matter what the weather is, they go out and they have to still get places and they ride their bikes, and how it teaches them grit because they have to work hard through any circumstance, whether it's good weather or bad weather, they're still required to do things. And so I just really love that aspect of it. So this quote was something that kind of stuck out to me. He said, "They must learn to fall down and pick themselves up again. If they never fall, they never learn to avoid it." He added, "Allowing them to be bored is also important. How else can a child learn to play on their own? A parent's job is not to entertain them constantly. The kids need to find ways to occupy themselves and invent their own amusements. That will stimulate their creativity and ingenuity." And I 100% agree with that quote, and so do a lot of people that study human development that I've read. And so you have to let them fall, you have to let them have these experiences. So I think, them being able to ride these bikes and go out there and experience things, whether that it's a good circumstance or not, in the rain or snow or yucky weather, which it is yucky weather there a lot of the year, they're able to just learn to problem solve. They're able to learn to push forward and to do hard things. And then also, it's okay for your kids to be bored. It's okay for them to have to figure out how to do things, and you don't have to entertain them all the time. Just walk away and tell them to figure out something to do, and they will do that. So I just wanted to mention a few things about the sex and drugs section that it talks about, and I agree with some of it. Some of it's coming from religious beliefs, the parts that maybe I'm not in total agreement with, but they are very open about sex and talking about those things with their kids, which I do think is important. I think the younger we start talking to our kids, still at an age appropriate type thing, the easier it will be to talk to them and for them to come ask us questions when they have them instead of turning to other resources. And so we'll just build a better relationship with them instead of being like, "Oh no, we don't talk about that," or "No, stop talking about that. We don't mention pornography," or anything like that. If we're open about it and willing to talk about it, then it becomes less taboo and they feel more comfortable coming to us instead of turning to other sources to find their answers. And so that's kind of their idea. They might be a lot more open than I would be willing to be. I'm not gonna go show my child pornography to say this is not what you should be looking at, or to say, oh, this is what they mean when they talk about pornography. I'm not gonna go show them pornography to teach them that. And that is something that they do mention in here that some parents would do. And so that was one thing that I didn't quite agree with. So I agree that we need to be open with our kids and that we need to be willing to talk to them about these things. I feel like it just creates a lot better environment of trust for them. I still feel like we can teach our kids boundaries. We don't have to say, oh, it's fine to have sex as long as it's in our home, that sort of thing. They can still abstain from sex until they're married, which is what I believe personally. And so you just have to teach them those things, I feel like, and you can still set boundaries that are good boundaries, but that are trusting boundaries. And you can work with them and that kids will still be willing to follow these rules if they understand why the rules are there and why it's important. So I feel like that's the biggest thing behind rules, is if they don't understand why they're important, then they're not gonna want to follow them. So I don't know if that made any sense. Anyways, but that was kind of my take on that section. Other than that, I really loved the whole book. And the last thing I wanted to share, let me see what page it was on, is 218. This is kind of just the summary, I guess, of what the book is talking about, like things that contribute to a child's happiness, since they're the happiest children in the world. So it says, for young babies and young children, the gift of a predictable routine, like let them sleep, let them eat, keep them clean. Having a routine is very, very important. And I am routine driven and I know that it's very important. So a home is a safe haven. So they need to feel safe in their homes. Parents who are there for them and offer them unconditional love. And then being given the tools which will gradually help them learn independence and self-reliance. Make sure they have plenty of time to play. These kids have tons of time to play. They play outside so much of the day. And so making sure your kids have tons of time to play, and not like on video games, okay? That does not count as play. Make sure they're going outside and experiencing nature, and then being given enough rules and boundaries to feel safe. So kids like to have rules and they like to have boundaries. I know that they push back against them and seem like they don't, but those rules and boundaries help them feel safe and help them feel like you care about them. And so give them some rules and boundaries. Anyways, those were the books that I read this last month, and I enjoyed all the things I learned. I'm excited to learn some new things this month as I read some more books. So if you have any book suggestions for me, please put them down below because I'd love to hear them and see what they are. And if you like these kind of videos, please give me a thumbs up, and I will see you next time.